On today's Xeno Enthusiast, I'm going to explore how we divide time and why we divide it that way. Something that I really like to do is find common ground with people all across the globe. And one of the things that we have in common is a 24-hour day. So today I want to talk a little bit about clocks and their origins. The clock was probably invented somewhere in the 1300s. There are still some really old clocks around on Earth that still work. There's one in particular that I really love, which is in Prague. And this is an astronomical clock, which means that it not only marks the time, but it also marks the position of the moon in the sky and where the sun is in the sky within the zodiac. And it also marks the moon phase. So it's a really beautiful clock in the central square in the old town city hall of Prague. It is one of the most famous ones, and it has a funny little peculiar history. When I was traveling in Europe in my 20s in the 90s, I learned that the man who designed this clock was then blinded by the king at the time because he was a very zealous king and he didn't want him to be able to recreate the clock for another kingdom. And then the clock broke down at some point, so he was forced to fix it blind. And I believed this story for so many years, and I just thought it always really haunted me. But then later in life, I learned that that story probably actually isn't really true, that it was probably made up by the next regime in order to malign that previous king. Interestingly enough, the word for clock and the word for bell are the same in French, cloche, which makes sense because as they started building these clocks in the central towers, of course, they had bells that went along with them to chime at the hour on the hour, and that way everybody knew what time it was in the village. I always wondered why the hands on the clock move clockwise. Well, I figured it out. There's actually a really good reason. So let me take you down and show you the sundial, and then I'm going to build you one and show you how it works. So here's how it works. You just need a stick and a compass. The needle's pointing north, like this. And you can see the shadow has just moved over a tiny little bit. It's actually almost 2 o'clock here, but we have to account for daylight savings time. So noon is actually 1 o'clock during daylight savings time. So why do the hands on the clock move clockwise? That's because in the northern hemisphere, the shadow across the earth moves clockwise around the center point. And in the southern hemisphere, the shadows actually move counterclockwise. I built this little model to try to show you that, and you might be able to see how in the northern hemisphere it moves clockwise around the center point, and in the southern hemisphere it moves counterclockwise. So I'm here in Port Hueneme at this beautiful site. This is a giant sundial that is here to honor a plane crash that happened right off the coast here. And the sundial is really beautifully thought out. They have a little heart marking the time and the date that the plane crash happened. And I'm guessing that on that time and that date, that the shadow that the gnomon casts will be right on that little heart. Very well thought out, really beautiful little site. I've always been fascinated with sundials, and I had this idea of making a really beautiful sundial plaza, like a giant sundial that had a stained glass gnomon, and so that it would cast a colored shadow across the earth as the shadow traveled across. I've never seen that before. There's probably one out there. I've researched it and really haven't found one, but in my lifetime I would like to make one, or like somebody to make one. And then I came to start thinking about natural structures or structures that are already in place that would make a good gnomon, you know, like the Eiffel Tower or like the Space Needle, for example. I think we should make a sundial out of the Eiffel Tower. It's already casting its shadow. If you went up to the top, you'd be able to see the sundial from above. But if you were down on the surface streets or around the river area, then you could be within the sundial. And wherever that shadow landed, they could put a marker there to depict the time. I think that's just a fantastic idea. I'd love to see that happen as well. So one last very unusual place where you may not expect a sundial is actually on planet Mars. Thanks to Bill Nye the Science Guy, there are 2 sundials on planet Mars, one on Spirit and one on Opportunity. Today's little piece about time and sundials has really made me think about how short our lifetimes actually are. We're just a little parentheses in time. There are tons of generations before us. There'll be a bunch of generations after us. So it's really important that we make really good use of the time that we have here. That might mean you need to hustle a little bit more. That might mean you need to rest a little bit more. That might mean you need to take more time for yourself, or it might mean that you need to spend more time with your loved ones and your family. But it's important to be intentional about the time that you're spending. I'm Camille Scott, and this is Xeno Enthusiast.